In this video, you're going to learn how to read and write from a text file. I'll see you in a moment. So what we're going to do now is create a new project. We'll ensure that Java is selected and SDK 13 is selected. Click New. We'll leave the Create Project template blank. We'll click Next. At this point, we're going to type in the name of our project is a file writer. Click Finish. When the project opens, drill into the right here, to the left, go down to Source, right click on it and say New Java Class. And we'll call this our file writer. Once that opens, we're also going to create a new file as well, and this is going to be a text file. And this text file we'll just call sample.txt. For our text file, I'm just going to input a few lines of code. This is a text file, and I'm going to copy it. Okay. Now with our text file copied multiple times and saved, we're going to go back to the file writer class, and we're going to create our public static void main method. And then we're going to create two additional methods as well. One is going to be a public static list string for the return type. And this will be called read file contents. This will take a final string file path. Then we're going to stub out another method as well, and we'll call this public static void write file contents. And this will take a parameter of a list of type string, and we'll call this our file contents, and it'll also take a string called our output path. We'll call that output file path. Go ahead and make the list here as well final. Now at this point, we have a couple of things that we need to do. We're going to go ahead and create a reference to our sample.txt over there on the right. We'll do this by creating a constant. And we'll right click on our class, copy the path, and this time we'll do a relative path. We'll paste that in. Now you'll notice that my file is sample.tx, and that's totally fine. Okay, now the next thing we'll also do here is we'll create another constant, and this constant will be our output path, and we'll call this sample2. Essentially what we're going to do is read from our sample text and then output to our sample text2 file. And you'll notice that these are using relative paths. Relative paths are relative to the current application as they're running. Okay. Now, at this point, what we want to do is we're going to go down to our read file contents, and we're going to set up a path. And we'll say paths get, and we'll read from our file path. With that done, we're going to create an input stream. We'll call it is, and we'll initialize it to null. Next, we'll also create a list object of type generic, and we'll call this list object our file contents. Notice that we're initializing it to an array list. Now, at this point, what we need to do is we need to create an input. We need to initialize our input stream and also create a buffered reader. So let's start with our input stream, and we'll do this by using the files new input stream, and we'll give it the path that we had selected earlier. Once we've done this, the IntelliJ IDE is going to complain because we need to catch that exception, and that's an IO exception. So now with that caught, let's go ahead and create a buffered reader, and we'll call this our buffered reader. This equals a new buffered reader, and the buffered reader takes a new input stream reader, which also takes an input stream. With those elements done, the next thing we need to do is create a string variable to hold the reading of our characters. So we'll say while. Let's fix that real quick, typing too fast. And inside of our while, we'll add an extra parenthesis. We'll say line equals our buffered reader, read line, and then we're going to interrogate and ask the question, is it null? Now, we also have an unhandled exception here, and this is because I was foolishly typing crazily. There we go. All right, so if our buffered reader is not null, then we want to append that to our file contents, and we'll just say file add and pass on our line. Now with everything done, we'll come down here and we'll return our file contents. And that completes the first method. So let's go up to our public static method, void main method, and we will call this one, and we'll pass in our file path. And of course, this is going to give us our red file contents. Okay. Now the next thing we need to do is fill out our methodology for writing file contents. And it's a little bit different, but it's also very similar. One of the first things I'm going to do though is we want to create a string builder, because as we receive the file contents, we want to write them back out. But what I think would be nice to do is to maybe put a line number on each row as we write it back out, and then maybe put a timestamp. So let's do that. So first of all, I'm going to create a variable called I, and inside my for loop, I'm just basically going to iterate now across my file contents. So I'll use a modified for loop for this, and I'll say my file contents, and then SB append, and we'll use I plus quotes, and then we'll append the line that we're reading out of the array list, and then we'll append another one, and this time we're going to say dash, and then we'll do append again, and this time we'll use the instant and call for now. And when that's complete, we just need to append a new line. Now, after we've done that, go ahead and do I++, so that when we read this string from our string array list into our string builder, it will append the contents. Now at this point, we need to pass our contents as a byte array, and writing data requires it to be written as a byte array. So we'll take our string builder and we'll say toString, and then we will get the bytes. Now we're very close now to actually writing our file, but again, we need to create a path, and we'll call this our output file path. And this is going to equal a paths, and we're going to get the output file path. And it looks like I may have made a mistake here, so let's change this up here in our method parameter. There we go. So we're going to get our output file. There we go. Now we have our path, and the next thing we need to do is we need to create an output stream. You notice above that we created an input stream. Well, we're going to do very much the same here as well. Okay, with our output stream created, now we need to create a buffered output stream, and we'll call this an output stream, and this is going to equal a buffered output stream, and this time we'll populate it by saying new output stream, and we will pass it a let's see, our output file path, and we're going to use a method up here that I don't have, but we're going to include an import, and what we're going to need is an import to an enum variable. So we're going to use a static import, say Java NIO file, and we'll use the standard option, and we'll just say include them all. Now there are several enum values that we could use there, but the one we want to use for creating a file is the create enum, and you can see it's available right there. Okay, so again, we're having the same question. It's asking that there's an exception and it needs to be caught. So we're going to surround this with our output, with our IO exception. And now we get to the interesting part. We need to write this data that we've collected from our array list and then modified in our string builder. So we'll say output stream, and we're going to write the bytes which we assign to data, and then we're going to say output stream flush, and then output stream close. Okay, now at this point we're very close. So we have our method set up. Let's go ahead and call it in our public static void main method. We'll say write file contents, and we know this takes an array list, and our array list is called read file contents. So we'll pass that in, and it also takes an output file path. Okay, if we've done everything correctly, we should be good to go. So let's run our program and see what happens. So we run the file writer program, and what we're expecting to happen is it's going to read the sample text, and then it's going to append to it a line number as well as a timestamp. And there's our sample text. It was created. We'll open it up. There's our line numbers and our timestamp.